Outside, winter presses gently against the windows, quiet, soft and cold, while inside, a warm glow settles over the room like a comforting blanket. A candle flickers on the table. A cup of something warm rests between your hands. And as the world slows for the evening, it's time once again to settle into a story, a journey into the deep past, where the roots of our most beloved holidays twist through centuries of celebration, tradition, and change. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Whether you're curled up in a snowy mountain town, relaxing in a warm southern climate, or tucked away somewhere in between, go ahead and share it down in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how far our little holiday travels stretch across the world. Tonight, we're venturing into the heart of Christmas itself. Not the Christmas we know today, with its twinkling lights, evergreen wreaths, gift wrap crinkling beneath the tree, and the jolly figure of Santa Claus. No, tonight we step back across thousands of years and dozens of cultures, following the winding path that brought this winter holiday into being. Because Christmas did not simply appear one December morning. It grew, layer by layer, century by century, shaped by empires long gone, by ancient fires that once burned in snowy forests, by storytellers and saints, by poets and painters, and by communities who gathered for warmth in the darkest days of winter. Before there were stockings hung by the chimney, there were Roman revellers dancing through the streets during Saturnalia. Before the Christmas tree decorated Victorian parlours, Northern European families lit Yule logs and believed that midwinter was a time when spirits wandered freely. And before Santa Claus flew across the night sky with his magical reindeer, there was St. Nicholas, a humble bishop whose quiet acts of generosity echoed across more than 1,000 years. Throughout this video, we'll trace the evolution of Christmas from these ancient beginnings to the holiday we know now. Our journey will begin in the bustling heart of the Roman Empire, where Saturnalia turned late December into a season of joy, role reversals, evergreen decorations, and gift-giving. Then we'll travel farther north into the world of the Norse and Germanic peoples, exploring the mystical traditions of Yule, the feasts, the fires, the evergreen symbols of life, and the legends of Odin's winter ride through the night sky. From there, we'll explore how early Christians adopted and reshaped these seasonal traditions, choosing December 25th as the date to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and weaving sacred meaning into the long-established midwinter festivities. We'll see how Christmas grew during the Middle Ages, how it was challenged and outlawed in parts of the early modern world, and how it found new life in the Victorian era through stories, songs, and newly embraced customs. And finally, we'll meet the many versions of St. Nicholas, bishop, miracle worker, protector of children, whose legend travelled from the Mediterranean to Northern Europe, sailed across the Atlantic with Dutch settlers, and eventually transformed into the rosy-cheeked Santa Claus known around the world today. So, settle in, let the soft lights glow, let the quiet of winter guide our steps, because the story of Christmas is the story of humanity's search for warmth, meaning and hope in the darkest time of the year. And tonight, we begin at the very beginning. Part 1. Saturnalia, the roots of winter feasting. Our journey begins in ancient Rome, 2,000 years ago, when the empire stretched across continents and the rhythm of life moved with the seasons. In the heart of winter, when the days grew short and the air turned cold, Romans looked forward to a festival unlike any other. Saturnalia, a celebration dedicated to Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. Saturnalia traditionally began on December 17th, and, over the centuries, grew from a single day into a full week of revelry. And in a world where winter was often a season of worry, of dwindling light, colder nights, and uncertain harvests, Saturnalia offered a kind of joyful defiance. Families and friends gathered to share warmth, laughter, and abundance, even if only for a short time. Imagine the streets of Rome during this festival, lanterns glowing from windows, evergreen wreaths decorating homes, tables piled high with food and drink. The mood was bright and playful, filled with music, jokes, and spontaneous games. Social rules loosened, and for a few days each year, life turned upside down in the most delightful way. One of the most striking features of Saturnalia was role reversal. Masters served their enslaved workers. Political seriousness was set aside. Even stern senators donned colourful caps called pilae and joined in the merrymaking. It was a symbolic return to what Romans believed was Saturn's ancient golden age. A mythical time of equality, peace, and simple joy. Gift-giving also played an important part in the celebrations. People exchanged small presents such as candles, figurines, and sweets, tokens of friendship and goodwill, meant to brighten the darkest days of the year. Candles especially carried deep symbolism. Their warm glow represented the return of light after the winter solstice, reminding everyone that the sun would rise higher in the sky again, day by day. Many households decorated with evergreen boughs, symbols of life continuing even in winter's chill. They set out tables filled with winter fruits, honey cakes, and wine. And throughout the city, you could hear an exclamation that became the cheerful hallmark of the festival. Io Saturnalia! A cry of celebration. But beyond the feasting and games, Saturnalia also fulfilled a deep human need. Midwinter is a turning point, a moment when people, ancient or modern, look towards the returning sun and hope for a season of renewal. Saturnalia helped the Romans feel connected to one another, to the rhythms of nature, and to the comforting belief that light always follows darkness. And though Saturnalia eventually faded as the Roman Empire transformed and Christianity spread, its spirit never fully vanished. The warmth, the feasting, the greenery, the gift-giving, and the emphasis on joy in the midst of winter. These echoes found new life centuries later in the celebration of Christmas. But Rome wasn't the only place where people marked the darkest time of year, with fire, feasts, and symbol-filled traditions. Far to the north, in colder lands where winter nights stretched long and deep, another festival was stirring, one that would leave its own mark on the story of Christmas, a festival called Yule. Part 2. The Winter Solstice Worldwide. As the Roman world filled its streets with lamps and laughter during Saturnalia, other cultures, far beyond the borders of the empire, had their own ways of honouring the deep midwinter. Across continents and centuries, people have looked to this moment when the year reaches its darkest point, and the sun seems to pause, hesitating on the horizon before slowly beginning its return. The winter solstice has long been a universal symbol of hope, renewal, and the triumph of light over shadow. No matter the culture, midwinter celebrations shared something in common. They offered reassurance. Even when the nights grew longest and the coldest winds swept across the land, communities gathered to remind one another that warmth and life would come again. Fires were lit, songs were sung, stories were told, and traditions took shape that would echo into the future. But among all these solstice traditions, none would influence the story of Christmas quite as profoundly as those of Northern Europe. Lands where winter was fierce, where snow piled high, and where the night sky stretched on like an endless velvet canopy. Here, people celebrated Yule, or Jule, one of the oldest and most mystical winter festivals in the world. Yule was celebrated by the Germanic and Norse peoples during the darkest days of winter, often spanning several nights. It was a time for feasting, honouring ancestors, and kindling fire against the long cold. At its heart, Yule was a celebration of life, enduring in the midst of winter's stillness. Families decorated their homes with evergreen branches, symbols of vitality that persisted through frost and snow. These same evergreens, and the hopeful meanings attached to them, would later become woven into Christmas traditions throughout Europe. Another iconic element of Yule was the Yule log. In its earliest form, it wasn't a small decorative piece. It was an enormous log or even an entire tree trunk. It was carefully chosen, brought into the home with ceremony, and placed into the hearth where it would burn for many hours or even days. As the log burned, families gathered for warmth and storytelling. Sparks and flames were believed to carry blessings for the year ahead, and the ashes were sometimes saved for protection or good fortune. But Yule also carried a mystical, otherworldly quality. Midwinter was believed to be a liminal time, a thin place between the living and the dead. Many northern peoples believed that spirits and ancestors walked freely during the longest nights of the year. And in some traditions, the great god Odin rode across the winter sky leading the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of riders and spirits sweeping through the clouds. Odin's winter journey, with his long white beard, his hooded cloak, and his ability to soar through the sky, would later echo in surprising ways through the legend of St. Nicholas, and eventually Santa Claus himself. For now, though, Yule remained its own powerful celebration, a blending of fire, feasting, remembrance, and reverence for the turning of the year. And as these northern traditions mingled with the Roman world, and later the Christian world, the foundations of a new midwinter holiday began to form. To understand how Christmas took shape, we next turn to a pivotal moment in history, when early Christians chose a date, December 25th, and began weaving their own meaning into the ancient winter tapestry. Part 3. The birth of Christmas in the early Christian world. As ancient Rome celebrated Saturnalia and Northern Europe honoured the mysteries of Yule, early Christians were shaping a new religious identity in a world filled with long-standing traditions. And for the first few centuries of Christianity, something might surprise us today. There was no Christmas, no feast on December 25th, no special service or season. In fact, early Christians placed much more emphasis on Easter, viewing the resurrection as the cornerstone of their faith. The birth of Jesus, while deeply meaningful, simply wasn't celebrated with an annual festival. The Gospels themselves don't mention a date, leaving early Christian writers to speculate. Some proposed spring, others autumn, but no consensus formed. So how did we get from uncertainty to December 25th? To understand, we have to look at the world Christianity grew up in. The Roman Empire was full of winter festivities, Saturnalia, the solstice celebrations, and a later holiday established by Emperor Aurelian called Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun, celebrated on December 25th. This was a festival honouring the sun's rebirth as daylight slowly began returning. For early Christians, who often drew symbolic parallels between Christ and light, this date carried powerful imagery. Jesus was frequently described as the light of the world, a beacon of hope in darkness. The idea of honouring his birth near the solstice felt spiritually meaningful. By the early 300s, the idea gained traction, and in the year 336 AD, the first known Roman calendar appears listing December 25th as the celebration of Christ's nativity. Over the next centuries, many Christian communities gradually adopted the date, weaving Christian meaning into familiar midwinter celebrations. This wasn't a case of copying or replacing traditions, as much as it was a process of layering, of blending sacred symbolism with the rhythms of the world people already knew. Midwinter had long been a time for gathering, feasting, lighting candles and sharing hope. Now, Christians added a new dimension, celebrating the birth of Jesus. But the earliest Christmas celebrations looked very different from today's cosy, candlelit customs. In many places, the observance centered around church services, reading scripture, singing hymns, and reflecting on the nativity story. The mood was solemn and reverent, not yet filled with bells, carols, or festive greenery. Those elements would come later, shaped by medieval culture and regional traditions. Some Christian leaders even debated how to celebrate. Should it be quiet and reflective, joyful and communal? Over time, the Nativity feast grew, expanding from a single day into an entire season, Advent leading up to Christmas, and 12 days extending beyond it, marked by feasting, charity, and storytelling. Slowly, the celebration grew outward, from the church into homes and communities, adopting and transforming winter customs already cherished by the cultures it touched. The blending of faith, symbolism, and ancient solstice traditions created something new, yet familiar. A celebration of light returning to the world, both physically and spiritually. But Christmas was still evolving. To see it truly blossom into the holiday we recognize today, we must travel into the Middle Ages, a time of feasting, pageantry, joyful chaos, and traditions that echo through our modern celebrations. Part 4. Medieval and Renaissance Christmas. As Christianity spread across Europe, Christmas gently expanded, first as a single holy day, then as a full season woven with rituals, music, food, and community. By the Middle Ages, Christmas had become one of the most anticipated times of the year. Not simply a religious feast, nor simply a winter celebration, but a rich tapestry of sacred observance and lively folk customs that shaped the holiday for centuries to come. The medieval Christmas season began with Advent, a period of preparation marked by prayer, fasting, and quiet reflection. But once December 25th arrived, the mood shifted dramatically. Christmas Day marked the beginning of a festive stretch known as the 12 Days of Christmas, lasting from December 25th to January 6th. These days became a joyful balance of church services, feasting, music and community gatherings. Churches played a central role, filling their spaces with candlelight, hymns and nativity plays. In many towns, guilds and local performers staged mystery plays, dramatic scenes depicting biblical stories, often performed outdoors in the crisp winter air. These productions brought the story of the Nativity to life for people of all ages, mixing devotion with creativity. Yet outside the church walls, Christmas also took on a more playful, sometimes rowdy character. One of the most fascinating traditions was the rise of the Lord of Misrule. In many regions, a commoner or young man was chosen to preside over merriment, games and revelry. For a few days, he symbolically ruled over feasts and festivities, turning social norms upside down. The echoes of Saturnalia's role reversal can be felt strongly here. The idea that once a year, the world could be delightfully rearranged. Common people celebrated with wassailing, a custom that combined singing, blessing orchards, and sharing spiced cider or ale. Groups of revellers travelled from house to house, offering songs and well wishes in exchange for treats or drink. Though much merrier and louder than the carolling we know today, it carried the same spirit of spreading joy and goodwill. Feasting was central to the season. Medieval households prepared roast meats, spiced pies, puddings, and bread sweetened with dried fruits. For many families, Christmas was the rare moment in the year when one might enjoy abundant food and warmth, even if only for a night. Tables glowed with candles, evergreen boughs and holly-decorated halls. Fires crackled while stories and songs filled the room. During the Renaissance, Christmas traditions became more refined in wealthy households. Lavish banquets, elaborate music, and beautifully decorated homes. Yet the communal spirit remained. Christmas was a time to open one's doors, offer hospitality, and care for the poor. Charity became a hallmark of the season, echoing the generosity associated with St. Nicholas. This period also preserved and reshaped much of the folklore that would later be intertwined with Christmas. The symbolism of holly and ivy, the importance of feasting, and the joyful disruption of everyday life. But Christmas was not always welcomed by everyone. As Europe moved into the early modern era, a new movement began questioning the excess and merriment of the holiday. Some believed Christmas should be solemn, stripped of feasts, games, and revelry. And their influence would bring about one of the most dramatic chapters in Christmas history. To explore this turning point, we travel now to the 1600s, where Christmas found itself challenged, outlawed, and ultimately reborn. Part 5. Christmas in the early modern world. As Europe stepped into the 1600s, Christmas, once a beloved fusion of sacred ritual and joyful festivity, suddenly found itself at the centre of controversy. The medieval season of feasts, singing and communal cheer was cherished by many, but a rising movement believed the holiday had strayed too far from its spiritual roots. To them, Christmas had become noisy, excessive, and altogether too merry. This movement was shaped by the Puritans, a group that valued simplicity, discipline, and strict interpretation of Scripture. Because the Bible didn't specify a date for Jesus' birth or command its celebration, the Puritans viewed Christmas with suspicion. They saw the feasting, role reversal, dancing and greenery as remnants of pagan customs rather than Christian devotion. And so, in the mid-17th century, something remarkable happened. Christmas was outlawed. In England, during the rule of the Puritan-led Parliament, Christmas celebrations were officially banned. Shops were ordered to remain open on December 25th. Decorations were discouraged. Soldiers patrolled the streets, removing displays of evergreen garlands and seizing food prepared for Christmas feasts. Traditional church services marking the Nativity were halted. Many families quietly resisted. They lit a candle anyway. They shared a small secret meal. For them, Christmas was not merely a day of revelry, but a cherished moment of warmth and faith, one they weren't willing to give up. Across the Atlantic in the Puritan colonies of New England, the ban took root even more firmly. For decades, celebrating Christmas in places like Massachusetts could result in fines. A traveller arriving in Boston during the 1650s or 1660s might be surprised to find December 25th treated like any other day. No bells, no feasts, no holiday cheer. Just ordinary work and a quiet determination to avoid what the Puritans viewed as disorderly customs. But even as Christmas was suppressed in Puritan regions, it flourished elsewhere. In many parts of Europe, Germany, France, the Netherlands and Italy, the holiday continued to grow in beauty and meaning. Christmas markets filled town squares with handmade goods and warm drinks. Families lit candles on evergreen boughs. Carols echoed through winter streets. And the figure of St. Nicholas continued to be beloved in many communities. When the political landscape shifted in England with the Restoration of 1660, Christmas returned almost overnight. The public poured into the streets with renewed enthusiasm, decorating homes with holly and ivy, preparing grand feasts and reviving older traditions they had missed for years. Music, laughter, and light once again filled the darkest days of the year. Yet the holiday was forever changed. The debates of the early modern era had raised a new question. What should Christmas be? A solemn religious observance, a joyful public festival, a season of charity, a family-centered celebration. In truth, Christmas would eventually become all of these things, woven together in a way that reflected centuries of influence. But to understand how Christmas took its next great leap, how it shifted from a patchwork of regional customs into something recognizable across much of the Western world, we must turn to a figure whose name is still spoken with warmth today. A generous bishop from the ancient Mediterranean, a bringer of hope during hard times, a man whose legend would travel across continents and centuries before transforming into the beloved character we know as Santa Claus. It's time to meet St. Nicholas. Part 6, St. Nicholas and the Birth of Santa Claus. Long before a jolly man in a red suit ever flew across the winter sky, there was a quiet, humble bishop living along the sun-warmed coast of the Mediterranean Sea. His name was Nicholas, and though he lived more than 1,700 years ago, his spirit of generosity would eventually shape one of the most famous figures in all of Christmas lore. St. Nicholas was born in the 3rd century in the port city of Patara, in what is now Turkey. Orphaned at a young age, he inherited considerable wealth. But instead of keeping it, he made a decision that would define his life. Nicholas chose to use his inheritance to help the poor, the sick, and the vulnerable. He joined the church and eventually became the Bishop of Myra, known for his compassion, humility, and devotion. Many stories would surround him over the centuries, but one became especially famous. A father in Nicholas's town had fallen into poverty and could not provide dowries for his 3 daughters. Without one, their futures looked bleak. Quietly, under the cover of night, Nicholas approached the family's home and tossed a bag of gold through the window. The next night, he returned with another. On the 3rd night, finding the window locked, he dropped the final bag of gold down the chimney, where it is said to have landed in a stocking hung by the fire to dry. Whether every detail of the story is literal or not, the message was clear. Nicholas's kindness had sparked a tradition of secret gift-giving, offered without expectation of recognition. As centuries passed, devotion to St. Nicholas spread across Europe. He became known as the protector of sailors, travellers, children, and the poor. Churches were built in his honour. Feast days were celebrated. And in many regions, especially in Northern Europe, children received small gifts on December 6th, St. Nicholas Day. His appearance varied from place to place. Sometimes a gentle bishop in flowing robes, other times a kindly wanderer with a long white beard and a walking staff. In the Netherlands, he became known as Sinterklaas, a bishop who travelled by horse, visited homes and rewarded children for good behaviour. It was the Dutch who would eventually carry this tradition across the ocean to the American colonies, bringing Sinterklaas to New Amsterdam, modern-day New York City. In early America, Christmas celebrations were still inconsistent, embraced warmly in some regions, overlooked in others. But Sinterklaas found a foothold in Dutch communities. Over time, English-speaking settlers reshaped his name into something more familiar: Santa Claus. 2 writers played crucial roles in transforming Santa into the figure we know today. First came Washington Irving, who in the early 1800s wrote a series of playful stories about a cheerful, pipe-smoking St. Nicholas who soared over rooftops in a wagon, delivering presents. These stories were imaginative and humorous, but they captured the public's attention. Then, in 1823, Clement Clarke Moore wrote a poem for his children, one that would quietly redefine Santa's image for generations to come. It began with a line many of us know by heart: "'Twas the night before Christmas." In Moore's poem, St. Nicholas was no longer a solemn bishop, but a jolly magical figure with twinkling eyes, a red nose, and a team of flying reindeer pulling a miniature sleigh. He slid down chimneys, filled stockings with care, and disappeared with a merry call of "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." During the 19th century, artists and illustrators expanded on this image. German-American cartoonist Thomas Nast drew Santa as a plump, bearded man in fur-lined clothing, living at the North Pole with a workshop and lists of children. His illustrations became wildly popular, cementing Santa's appearance in the public imagination. It's often said that Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus, but that's not quite true. The company's 1930s advertising simply built upon a centuries-long evolution, giving the modern Santa his now iconic look: rosy-cheeked, warm, friendly, and dressed in bright red. And so, through ancient acts of kindness, medieval celebrations, Dutch legends, colonial storytelling, and Victorian imagination, St. Nicholas slowly transformed into the Santa Claus beloved today. But our story isn't finished yet. To see Christmas as we know it truly take shape, trees glowing with candles, families gathering by the hearth, carols drifting through snowy streets, we must journey into the Victorian era, when Christmas blossomed into a global holiday of warmth, nostalgia, and togetherness. Part 7. Christmas becomes a global holiday. By the time the 1800s arrived, Christmas had woven itself into many corners of the Western world, but it was still far from the holiday we know today. Customs varied wildly from region to region. Some families celebrated quietly, others revelled with boisterous feasts. Some communities emphasized church services, while others barely acknowledged the day at all. But then came a remarkable cultural shift, one that transformed Christmas from a patchwork of local traditions into a warm, universal celebration of family, generosity, and togetherness. At the heart of this transformation stood an era that adored nostalgia, storytelling, and the comforts of home, the Victorian Age. During the mid-1800s, the Victorians reimagined nearly every aspect of Christmas. They embraced the season with a kind of romantic enthusiasm that would shape the holiday for generations. Hearths glowed, parlours filled with greenery, and families gathered for games, music, and long evening conversations. Christmas became not just a religious day or a community event, but a celebration centred around the home itself. One of the most iconic additions of the Victorian era was the Christmas tree. Though evergreens had been used for centuries in various winter celebrations, it was Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, born in Germany, who helped introduce the decorated tree to the English-speaking world. When a London newspaper published an illustration of the royal family gathered around their candlelit tree in 1848, the image captured the public's imagination. Almost overnight, Christmas trees became a beloved centerpiece of the holiday. Victorians also popularized Christmas cards. The very first commercial Christmas card was printed in 1843, adorned with festive artwork and warm wishes. As printing became cheaper, cards spread rapidly, allowing people to send holiday greetings near and far, an early echo of our modern traditions. But perhaps the most influential Victorian contribution to Christmas came from one man, Charles Dickens. In 1843, Dickens published A Christmas Carol, a story that blended ghostly suspense with a powerful message of compassion, generosity, and redemption. Through the transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge, Dickens rekindled public interest in charity, family, and the spirit of goodwill. His tale struck a chord so deeply that it helped reshape the very meaning of Christmas. It encouraged readers to see the holiday not merely as a day of celebration, but as a season of kindness and reflection. Soon, many of the elements we recognize today took root in Victorian households. Christmas crackers, stockings hung by the fire, carols sung door to door, and special meals shared with loved ones. The holiday became an anchor of comfort in an era marked by rapid industrial change. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Christmas blossomed in America as a uniquely blended celebration. Immigrants from Germany brought trees and gingerbread. Those from Ireland introduced lively songs and festive gatherings. Dutch families continued their traditions of Sinterklaas. British customs mingled with new American innovations. The result was a holiday that grew richer, more diverse, and more widely beloved with each passing year. By the early 20th century, Christmas had become a truly global event. Advances in transportation and communication helped spread its imagery and symbols across continents. Radio broadcasts filled living rooms with seasonal music. Magazines featured stories of Christmas cheer. And Santa Claus, shaped by centuries of storytelling, became a universally recognized figure of joy and generosity. Yet even as Christmas grew more modern, it held tightly to its ancient threads. Evergreens from Yule, gift-giving from St. Nicholas, feasts from medieval celebrations, and the celebration of light's triumph over darkness from the solstice. And so, from ancient fires to modern city streets, Christmas evolved into a holiday that speaks to something deep within the human heart, a longing for warmth, belonging, and hope in winter's darkest nights. Now, as we reach the end of our journey, it's time to reflect on what all these centuries of tradition truly mean, and what the story of Christmas continues to offer us today. And now, as our journey through time gently comes to an end, the lights of history begin to fade into the soft glow of the present moment. The candle beside us flickers low, casting long shadows across the room, while winter settles quietly outside. It's here, in this stillness, that we can truly feel the weight of all the centuries that have shaped the holiday we know as Christmas. From the lively streets of ancient Rome, filled with laughter and lanterns during Saturnalia, to the snowy forests of northern Europe, where families gathered around blazing Yule logs, to the early Christian communities who found deep spiritual meaning in the darkest days of the year. From medieval halls echoing with wassail songs and the playful anarchy of the Lord of Misrule, to Puritan towns where Christmas nearly vanished, to the humble generosity of St. Nicholas drifting across continents and centuries, from Victorian parlours glowing with candle-lit trees and Dickens's calls for compassion, to the modern celebrations that fill our homes today with music, warmth and joy. Christmas has always been at its heart a tapestry, woven from countless threads of culture, belief, myth and tradition. It is a holiday built not in a single moment, but across thousands of moments, each adding its own colour and meaning. And yet, for all its complexity, Christmas continues to speak to us in simple, timeless ways. It is the promise of light returning in the darkest part of the year. It is the comfort of gathering with those we love. It is the generosity that echoes the spirit of St. Nicholas. It is the hope that runs like a warm thread through every winter celebration humanity has known. Tonight, as you sit in your quiet space, perhaps with the soft glow of a lamp or a tree nearby, you are participating in something ancient, something shared, something human. The same longing for warmth and connection that once drew people to Roman feasts, Yule fires, medieval halls, and Victorian hearths draws us still. So, as we close this chapter of holiday history, take a moment to breathe deeply, to appreciate how far this journey has carried us, and to let the spirit of the season settle gently around you like a blanket of snow. And wherever you are listening from tonight, near or far, snowy or warm, bustling or quiet, may your holiday season be filled with peace, history, and a touch of the magic that has travelled with Christmas for thousands of years. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And until our next bedtime story, good night.